Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Caithness Amateur Drum Antiques Society tasting. And tonight I'm gonna do the first in what will be three videos I'm gonna do about the effects of different finishing and maturation on whiskey. Uh, and tonight I'm going to look at the effect of port finishing and maturation on whiskey. I've got three whiskies that were finished in different types of port. And I've also got three of those types of port, each of those types of ports, to taste before I taste the whiskey and then see what kind of effect I think the maturation or finishing in port cask has done. So the three whiskies I've got are a Tomintoul white port 14-year-old at 46%, a Spey Tenne Tawny port 46%, and Talisker Portree 45.8%. So port finishing or maturation, port wine is the Portuguese version of sherry. It's made from grape juice, which is then fermented and fortified with brandy. Port wine, also called port for short, comes from the Douro Valley in Portugal. And just like Scotch, port is now a protected designation of origin. Every port wine, therefore, comes from Portugal. It's made from fermented grape juice. However, there are differences between the different types of port. The biggest difference is in terms of sweetness or dryness, which is determined by the residual sugar content. Wines with low residual sugar content are called dry. Those with a high sugar content are called sweet. And that residual sugar content is determined in several ways. First, by the grapes used. A fully ripe grape has more sugar than an unripe one, and some grape varieties also contain more sugar than others. In addition, fermentation plays a role in the sugar content. The sugar from the grapes is converted into alcohol by yeast until all the sugar is used up or the yeast dies due to alcohol poisoning. To artificially achieve a higher residual sugar content, the fermentation process is stopped by adding brandy, and the alcohol content increases. The yeast dies of alcohol poisoning and does not convert the remaining sugar into alcohol any further. So, what happens when a whiskey is matured in a port cask? Well, it depends on the sweetness or dryness of the port previously in the cask. To be able to determine the effect the cask has on whiskey, you really have to find out what kind of port was previously contained in that cask. Most ports tend to be sweet, so in principle one can assume that post-maturation in a port cask usually adds rather sweet and fruity flavours to the whiskey. But port wine is not really 100% Portuguese product after all. It must be produced in Portugal, but not all the raw materials must come from Portugal. For example, much of the brandy used does not come from Portugal, but from developing countries, mainly in South America. And with the colour, it does depend on the port that you've used. A very dry port has little effect on the colour of whiskey. A very sweet one, on the other hand, makes the whiskey very dark. And it's one way of determining whether a port cask contains sweet or dry wine. But you've got to be careful with that because you must make sure that the whiskey is not artificially coloured. One of these tonight is. And it's also important to know how long the whiskey was allowed to mature in the port cask. If the whiskey has been in for more than 5 years and has not taken on dark colour, it was almost certainly a dry port. So the first whiskey up tonight is the Tomintoul white port, 14-year-old at 46%. And I've got a white port here. I've got the Quinta de Pedra Alta white port at 18%. Just a little bit of this to just make an impression. So this Quinta de Pedra Alta's white port is made using a trio of grape varieties, namely Ruighe, Guvejo and Viosinho, which are grown in some of Quinta de Pedra Alta's highest vineyards. And the grapes are picked early in the morning and pressed as soon as they arrive at the winery. It's kept as cool as possible and handled with care throughout the winemaking process to try and keep its vibrancy and freshness of the flavour profile. I think white port is best served chilled and with ice, or with a good tonic water and a slice of fresh orange. But what is white port anyway? It's a lot simpler than you're probably thinking. It's port that uses a white grape varietal instead of the darker kinds used for other ports. And not a lot of white ports are aged in a barrel, which might explain why it's taken so long for the used barrels to make their trek across the ocean. But for those who have drank it next to a darker port, the difference is how much brighter it tastes. There's said to be more citrus and stone fruit flavours, and it can also be sweeter. But that's really all dependent on how soon fermentation is stopped, when the producer adds the brandy to the fermentation tank. So this one, I get bright pear and pineapple and a tangy hint of citrus oil. And that's all reflected in the palate as well. Pineapple, pear, very fruity, sweet. Very nice actually. I'm going to cleanse the palate very quickly with a... Well, I thought as a sport we're doing, I should have cheese and biscuits, but I've combined the two with Jacob's Mini Cheddars. So the whiskey is Tomintoul, 14-year-old, 46%, and it was distilled in 2008 and matured initially in American oak ex-bourbon cask before being finished in hand-selected white port barriques from Portugal. And it's a limited release of only 5,610 individually numbered bottles. I think they have produced this into the core range now. So, Tomintoul's new make spirit, noses of light cereal, oatmeal, it's sweet underneath, touch of mashed tongue. It's appetizing and sweet. And on the mouth, it's focused, high toned, sweet with a clean green character in the centre. It's quite intense, although Tomintoul is known as the gentle malt. I would expect the white port finish to impart summer fruits like strawberries and a floral or herbal character. It's got a nice tide line, this one. Lovely tears. Let's see what we got on the nose. And you do get floral notes. Elderflower and orchard blossom. White grapes and a pineapple sweetness. With soft barley and toast. There's some tangy stone fruits and lychees mingled with lemon drizzle cake, vanilla pod, and ginger biscuits. It's quite complex. Vanilla, red berries, cinnamon, chocolate, and some little roasted aromas. We'll try them out. And there's plenty of fruity tang with summer berries, sultanas, and honeyed prunes. It's syrupy flapjacks and a dash of fresh vanilla and lots of uh, apricot Danish, poached pears, and tart tatin, all bound with black coffee, buttery malt, and baking spices. It's sweet, spicy, lightly acidic, and the port note is there. Not entirely sure it's my thing. And the finish is praline, yellow plums, spiced biscuits, and hints of creamy mocha. It's sweet and warming with notes of Swiss roll and strawberry trifle with that mocha toasted nuts. It's a medium finish, sweetish, slightly spicy, and a little astringent. I'm going to try a mill of water in this. Again, still nice tears on this. There's definitely a little bit of Scotch mist happening there. I'm going to review an Imperial shortly, and with that Imperial, sorry about that. With that Imperial, I'm going to show you some of the amazing, almost instant Scotch mist that can appear with a really integrity malt. But we'll do that one at the time. So with water, it's got nice berry fruits, red berry fruits, freshly baked fruit, bread, and strawberry tarts with hints of cinnamon and nutmeg. Try them out. And it's sweet and complex with notes of cooked fruits, bramble jam, and shortbread biscuits, all mingled with panna cotta, ginger, and toasted oak. And the finish is layers of raspberry coulis, creme caramel, and cocoa powder, structured with cedarwood and pink peppercorn spices. This is largely understated whisky, and it's certainly laid back, like much of Tomintoul's range. But it's also spirit forward and entirely relaxed in its own skin. Granted, in the grand scheme of big brassy whiskies, Tomintoul can seem rather unassuming to some, but there's an honesty here. Whereas other whiskies will deliver much more punchy flavour, there's often a disconnect between the relationship between the spirit and the wood. Not in this case. The white port cask have added much of what I anticipated, the fruitiness, the sweetness. Uh, yeah, very nice. I'll cleanse my palate with another mini cheddar. So next we're going to look at the effect tawny port will have on a whisky. And for this one, I've got the Spey Tenne tawny port, 46%. Much darker than the Tomintoul. And this one, I've got the port. I've got Coburn's Fine Tawny Port. This one is very dark. Quite sticky looking as well. So, this port, Coburn's Fine Tawny Port, is made with wines which have aged between 2 to 3 years old. And once you've opened a port, it should last for about 8 weeks after opening. Will this one be a great match for decadent puddings like sticky toffee pudding and, of course, after dinner cheese boards, or in my case, mini cheddars. So let's see what we've got. It's got murky, earthy aromas and makes for a rather mediocre first impression. The palate's better. You get quite raucous red berries and a sort of mellower caramel notes on the palate. Right, I'll put them in a mini cheddar, squish of water. So, this Spey Tenne Tawny Port, 46%, initially aged in bourbon cask and then finished in Tawny port cask from the family-run winery Quinto de Filoco for 6 months. It was a limited release of 18,000 individually numbered bottles and bottled at 46%. Non-chill filtered and with no added colour. The new make of Spey is very, or was, Spey of course, I think they've relocated, but it's really a new distillery, so Spey is, I guess, is now a lost distillery in that sense. The new make was very fragrant and intense with sherbet, sour plum and green apple aromas. The palate light and sweet, fizzy with a green melon lift towards the back, and the finish lightly floral. I'd expect Tawny Port finish to impart a sweet character with nutty notes, dried fruits, and a sort of aged oak element to this. So let's see. It's a bit darker than this is a non-age statement, but it's certainly much darker than the Tomintoul was. But Tawny Port is quite a dark port. And it's fresh on the nose with a sort of luscious red fruit, cherries, red berries, baked apples, juicy red currants. And there are delicate aromas of port wine mingling with pear and vanilla ice cream. It's fruity, sweet, fresh and appealing. Very pleasant, but it is a bit understated. You get some of that malty bread and syrupy dark fruits and a floral honey sweetness. Faint raspberry jam, rosy wine, touch of potpourri and pale fruits. Creme brulee with a raspberry and strawberry compote. Strawberry, raspberry, jam sugar cookie. There's a slight alcoholic tingle, but only if you stick your nose very much into the glass. Try them out. And it's quite intensely flavourful. Malty bread, almost rye bread even. Dark fruits, stewed apples, and a floral honey sweetness. And you get that sort of mineral sweetness you find in mountain spring water, and a slightly nutty quality. Port has a large influence here. It's impacting a rich, full flavoured sweetness of dark fruits and berries. It's smooth and discreet on the palate. Sweet red fruit, cherries, candy-like aromas nicely intermingle with a sort of intense spiciness of oak, cinnamon, ginger and pepper. It's a lovely warm fruitiness with tender honey. It's light in texture, sweet, fruity, and then it dries slightly. A white pepper and cinnamon that gives way to strawberries and cream. And the finish is almondy, floral honey sweetness, musty malt, mineral water, touch of oak, vanilla tannins, and roasted hazelnut. And the finish lasts for a good length of time. Medium, nice and sweet, sticky honey, stewed red fruit. It comes quite dry in the tail with oak and subtle cloves. I'll try a mill of this, a mill of water. So taking it down to about 35, I would say. There is you can see an almost slightly reddish glow there. So it has taken on some of the colour of the board. And it's clean and fresh on the nose. And the water brings more flavours of red fruit, salad to the fore, with ripe bananas and custard in the back. Try them out. And water amps the sweetness up, and the creme brulee returns. Lots of luscious fruit, cherry, orange, banana, and pear, and then you get that slightly tame spiciness of oak, cloves, and pepper. And the finish is medium well, sweet with sticky fruit, slightly drying aftertaste with oak and cinnamon. So this one has a lighter roman taste, and it's very easy to drink, I have to say. It's a quaffing malt, and it'll please the crowd, but being complex enough to entertain more experienced malt aficionados. And it'd be a good bottle for the Christmas family Christmas table. It's enjoyable, well-rounded, and without any obvious faults. It's not insanely complex, but it's quite delicious and good value for the flavour experience. Highly drammable, and the tawny port finish has worked very well here. I'll have another mini cheddar, cheese and biscuits. So now we have the Talisker Portree 45.8%, and for that one I've got the Taylor's Late Bottled Vintage Port 2018 for 20%. I can't remember if I reviewed Talisker Portree. I'd have to look back at my notes. I love vintage port. This one's really quite ruby red. So there's cheaper entry points to Taylor's range, but the late bottle vintage is what I would recommend as a starting whisky, primarily because of the level of quality being high. But Taylor's also have a long history with this style of port. They popularised this during the 1960s and 70s, building upon its initial development by Quinto del Noval. It's not the grandest of ports, of course, but it's a style that often gives immediate and accessible pleasure. And in terms of value for money, it wins hands down. And it's got a dark and glossy hue to it. It's got lovely tears. It's got Brighton perfume notes, black cherry, dark chocolate, rose petals, and even white peach, with nuances of orange peel, tar, and spice plum. And the palate is polished and coherent. Sweet layers of blackberry, spice, and tar. Lovely sweetness and a superb sense of energy. Finishing up with a rich wrapping of powdery tannin and all within that silky substance. It's a fine example of the late bottled vintage style of port. So this whisky, I'm just in my cheddar. So this Talisker Portree non-age statement at 45.8% is finished in port wine cask, which should impart a new dimension to the Talisker. The new make of Talisker has a light smoke on the nose to start, very sweet with sulphur in the background, oyster brown, lobster shell with perfume smoke at the end. And the palate is dry, smoky, and sulphury with light tar, new leather, soft fruits, and salty. And the finish is long, smoky, and peppery with sulphur underneath. And I'd expect the port cask to impart a rich stewed fruits, dark chocolate, oak, and wood spice onto this. So this is coloured, this is chill filtered, but it does have a nice reddish glow, which wouldn't have come from E150. So the port casks have had an effect on the colour a bit. Nice tears, and you do get that initial sea spray classic note on the nose of Talisker, and then you get Criollo crayons, orange pith, and a touch of white chocolate. Demerara and even sticking plaster emerges briefly with plummy umami notes. There's plenty of smoke, a briny note. There's some sweetness from port. There's some red berries, strawberries, milk chocolate, minerals, a layer of honey. It's somewhat floral too. It's winey and a bit in your face sweet, but still has that soft breeze of sea air and mild peat. And it would be hard to pick this out as Talisker on a blind tasting, I suspect. Port is quite dominant. Port, cereal, vanilla, nutmeg, salt, sea air, distant campfire, smoke, almonds, molasses, caramel, chocolate chip cookies, raisins, citrus, apple, and then the umami notes come in, the sweet barbecue sauce, bacon, pepper steak, and a subdued earthy peat. It's really powerful in the port. I think the spirit's taken a serious beating by the port casks. Try them out. And it has the initial characteristic of Talisker grime again, but it's much sweeter than usual. It's thick and mouth coating like the Talisker Storm, with chili and a little chocolate orange. It's less smoky than the nose would suggest. It's quite sweet though. Blueberries, red berries, plums, milk chocolate, slightly peppery, chili peppers, but less than I'm used to with Talisker. And it's somewhat salty too, maybe a bit less sweet, velvety in mouthfeel, just a slight burn. And then it turns a little dry and tannic, perhaps even grainy after the arrival. Salt, pepper, ginger, vanilla, chocolate, dates, orange peel, strawberry jam, and then the umami with the smoke in the glazed ham, and a sharp but not too dominant peat note. Everything is where it is, and it stays that way. There's no real depth, unfortunately. And the finish is milk chocolate becoming cocoa and oak with mocha notes and the faintest hint of that orange pithing in, fruits, brine, peat, salted caramel and dark chocolate, accompanied by a whiff of smoke. I'll put a mill in this one. And now I get mild dried fruits from the port cask. Mild smoke, mild savoury tones, sweeter red berries, and a little soapier as well. Try them out. Dried fruits and a distinctive balance between savoury and sweetness. Quite oily and viscous, toffee and citrus, with a sort of kirsch, Talisker pepper and chili with a hint of smoked pepper. And the finish has got that plum jam again, cocoa powder, creating dark dryness and more smoke. I think alongside the distillery style, there are similarities with Talisker Storm with the thicker, oilier mouthfeel and wood smoke. Poetry has taken on additional characteristics from the port cask, however, adding sweetness and different notes such as plum and chocolate. The classic Talisker notes are there, but that also counts for the influence of the port cask. And it's a little bit too much for me, as it's quite sweet at some points. And it's not the kind of sweetness I like. And it does feel like there's something missing, but I can't quite put my finger on it. So, port and whiskey. I still think the Cragganmore Distillers Edition, double matured in port cask wood, is my favourite port finish single malt. I can say the time in port cask with that really helps add complexity, even if the end eventually tapers off into sweetness and grain again. But for the three tasted here, the Tomintoul with a white port finish and the Spey with a tawny port finish are both very good. As for Talisker, I just wish they would take a tumble to themselves and get back to producing what once was a pinnacle of elemental Scotch whisky with no need for any finishes. Thank you for listening.